You clicked on this title because something inside you knows that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes, it's justice perfectly timed. The sterile smell of disinfectant couldn't mask what had happened, and 47 million people had already seen the proof. Emma Carter's fingertips traced the edge of her smartphone screen, the numbers still climbing even as she lay in the narrow hospital bed. 47.3 million views. The video had been live for exactly 72 hours, and the world had already decided whose side they were on. Her mother, Sandra, sat in the plastic visitor's chair, still wearing her nursing scrubs from the overnight shift at Riverside General. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They'd spent the last 3 days in a different hospital, one where Sandra wasn't the caregiver, but the fierce protector of her only daughter. "Turn it off, sweetheart," Sandra whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and 3 days of phone calls with lawyers, reporters, and school administrators. "You don't need to keep watching it." But Emma couldn't stop, not because she enjoyed reliving those 60 seconds of humiliation, but because she was still processing the impossible reality that her pain had become a movement. The comments section was a river of rage and support flowing in equal measure. Thousands of strangers sharing their own stories of being pushed down, pushed around, pushed into silence. The video quality was surprisingly clear for something recorded on a smartwatch. You could see everything. Chad Morrison's face as he grabbed her head. Madison Reynolds laughing as she filmed with her phone. Tyler Brooks pressing down with both hands as Emma's face met the cafeteria floor. Ashley Park's voice, crystal clear in the audio. "Eat it, trailer trash, or we'll make you lick the whole floor clean." What the bullies hadn't counted on was that quiet didn't mean helpless. Emma's thumb hovered over the pause button, freezing the frame at the moment when she looked directly into her watch camera. Even through the pain and humiliation, there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that looked remarkably like hope. "Mrs. Carter." The voice belonged to Detective Maria Santos, who'd been assigned to the case when the video hit 10 million views, and the police department could no longer ignore the flood of calls demanding arrests. She knocked gently on the door frame. "I have some updates for you both." Sandra straightened in her chair, the same way she did when a trauma patient came into her ER, ready for anything, prepared for the worst. "Come in, Detective." Detective Santos was younger than Emma had expected, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes that had probably seen too much but still held compassion. She pulled up a chair, creating a small circle of 3 women who'd all learned something about strength in the past few days. "The district attorney has reviewed the video evidence," Detective Santos began, consulting her notes. "We're moving forward with criminal charges against all 4 students involved: assault, battery, and harassment. Tyler Brooks is facing additional charges due to his prior record." Emma felt her mother's hand find hers. 3 days ago, the idea of Chad Morrison facing real consequences seemed as impossible as flying. Now it was simply Tuesday's news. "What about the school?" Sandra's voice carried the sharp edge of a mother whose trust had been shattered. "What about the administration that let this happen?" Detective Santos's expression grew more serious. "That's where things get complicated. The Federal Department of Education has opened an investigation into the school district's handling of bullying reports. Apparently, your daughter's case wasn't isolated. There are records going back 3 years of similar incidents involving the same students." Emma spoke for the first time since the detective arrived. "You mean they knew enough?" Detective Santos confirmed. And that's what's going to make this case about more than just 4 kids making a bad choice. This is about a system that failed to protect students like you. The room fell quiet, except for the distant sounds of hospital life announcements over the PA system. The squeak of wheels on linoleum, the constant beeping of machines keeping people alive. Emma stared at her phone screen, where the view count had climbed to 47.4 million. 72 hours ago. She'd been nobody. A junior at Jefferson High School who ate lunch alone, walked the hallways with her head down, and had perfected the art of being invisible. She'd grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment where the rent was always a struggle, and her clothes came from discount stores. But her mother had raised her to believe that kindness mattered more than money. That education was the way out, and that someday the right moment would come to stand up for herself. Emma just never imagined that moment would be recorded in high definition and shared with nearly 50 million strangers. The irony was bitter and beautiful at the same time. Chad Morrison, who'd spent 4 years terrorizing anyone he deemed beneath his social status, had handed her the weapon that would destroy his future in less than 60 seconds. Madison Reynolds, who controlled Jefferson High's social hierarchy with the precision of a dictator, had provided the audio evidence that would strip away her college scholarship. Tyler Brooks, already walking the line between juvenile detention and graduation, had pushed too hard and fallen off the cliff himself. And Ashley Park, the artist who used her talents to humiliate rather than create, had filmed her own group's downfall from multiple angles. They'd been so confident in their power, so certain that Emma would never fight back, that they'd performed their cruelty like a show. And in a way, it had been a show, just not the one they'd planned. Emma, Detective Santos leaned forward, her voice gentle but urgent. I need you to understand something. This video has changed your life in ways you might not realize yet. There are reporters downstairs right now, waiting to interview you. There are lawyers calling your mother every hour offering to represent you. There are college recruiters who've seen your story and want to meet you. Emma looked up from her phone, meeting the detective's eyes. And there are probably people who think I deserved what happened to me. Yeah, Detective Santos said, not sugarcoating the truth. There are. That's why you need to be careful about how you handle what comes next. This isn't just about justice anymore. It's about who you want to become in the aftermath. Sandra squeezed her daughter's hand tighter. She'd been 17 once, though she'd never had to navigate trauma under the spotlight of viral fame. Her own high school experience had been quieter, more anonymous. But she remembered the feeling of being powerless in the face of cruelty. She remembered the adults who looked the other way, the friends who stayed silent, the weight of carrying pain alone. What do you want to do, sweetheart? Sandra asked. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on something beyond the hospital window. Outside, life in Riverside continued as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis. Cars moved through traffic, people went to work, students attended classes at schools where maybe, just maybe, they thought twice before hurting someone smaller than themselves. I want to go home, Emma said finally. I want to sleep in my own bed and eat cereal for dinner and pretend none of this happened. I want to go back to being invisible. She paused, scrolling through the comments on her video, story after story from people who'd been where she was, who'd felt what she felt, who'd never found their moment to fight back. But I can't do that anymore, can I? If you've ever felt invisible, ever watched injustice happen in silence. This story is for you. A quick like helps this reach others who need to hear it. And subscribing means you won't miss the stories that matter. Your comments below mean everything. They remind us we're not alone in believing that every voice deserves to be heard. Your support through the thanks button really means the world to me and helps me continue creating these stories that hopefully touch someone who needs them. Detective Santos shook her head slowly. No, Emma, you can't. Whether you asked for it or not, you've become a voice for people who haven't found theirs yet. The question is, what you want to say. The weight of that responsibility settled over Emma like a blanket that was both comforting and suffocating. She'd spent 16 years perfecting the art of not being noticed. And now, millions of people were hanging on her every word. She'd dreamed of being special, of mattering. But she'd never imagined it would come at such a cost. Can I ask you something? Emma looked at Detective Santos. When you were my age, did you ever think about what you'd do if you had the chance to make things right, not just for yourself, but for everyone who couldn't fight back? Detective Santos smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, she looked less like a police officer and more like someone who remembered being young and angry and desperate for justice. Every day, she admitted, and you know what I learned. The chance doesn't come when you're ready for it. It comes when you're scared and hurt, and the last thing you want is attention. But that's also when it matters most. Emma's phone buzzed with another notification. 47.6 million views. The number was climbing faster now. As the story spread from social media to traditional news outlets to dinner table conversations across the country. Somewhere, a parent was asking their child if they'd ever seen bullying at school. Somewhere, a principal was reviewing their anti-bullying policies. Somewhere, a quiet kid was watching Emma's video and thinking, maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to suffer in silence. I keep thinking about something, Emma said, her voice stronger now. 3 days ago, if someone had told me that Chad Morrison and his friends would be expelled and facing criminal charges, I would have laughed. It seemed impossible. They owned that school. She held up her phone, showing the video that had changed everything. But I had this. She touched the smartwatch on her wrist, still bandaged from where she'd scraped it against the cafeteria floor. I had proof. And once people could see what happened, once they couldn't deny it or minimize it or explain it away, everything changed. Sandra felt tears welling up again, but they were different now. 3 days ago, she'd cried from helplessness and rage. Now she was crying from pride. Her daughter was finding her strength in the worst possible circumstances, transforming pain into purpose with a wisdom that shouldn't have been necessary at 16. So what's the plan? Detective Santos asked, sensing that Emma was working toward a decision. Emma was quiet for another moment, watching the numbers climb on her screen. 47.7 million. Each view represented a person who'd chosen to witness her pain, her humiliation, her moment of powerlessness. But they'd also witnessed what came after. They'd seen that quiet didn't mean weak, that invisible didn't mean voiceless, that sometimes the smallest person in the room could create the biggest change. I want to go back to school, Emma said, finally. Both women stared at her in surprise. Emma, honey, Sandra began. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Emma's voice was calm, but certain. They're going to have assemblies about bullying now. They're going to bring in speakers and make new rules and hang up posters about kindness. But none of that matters if the kids who need help most are still afraid to ask for it. She looked directly at Detective Santos. How many other videos like mine are out there? How many kids are recording their own pain but too scared to share it? Detective Santos nodded slowly, understanding. In her 3 years working cases involving minors, she'd seen dozens of incidents that never made it to court because the victims were too traumatized, too intimidated, or too convinced that nothing would change to come forward. "You want to be the example," Detective Santos said. "You want to show them that speaking up can work." "I want to show them that they're not alone." Emma's voice carried a conviction that surprised even her. "I spent 3 years at Jefferson High watching people get hurt and telling myself it wasn't my business. I was so focused on staying invisible that I forgot invisible people can still be witnesses." She turned to her mother, knowing this conversation would be the hardest one. "Mom, I know you want to protect me. I know you'd rather transfer me to another school or homeschool me or move to another state. But if I run away now, what message does that send to the kids who can't run? What about the families who can't afford to move or transfer or start over?" Sandra had spent 16 years preparing for moments like this, teaching her daughter to be strong, to stand up for herself, to believe she deserved respect and dignity. She just hadn't expected the lesson to be tested on such a public stage. "It's going to be hard," Sandra said finally. "Harder than you can imagine. There will be people who support you, but there will also be people who blame you, who say you should have handled it differently, who think you've gone too far. I know. There will be days when you want to take it all back, when the attention feels like too much, when you miss being nobody special. I know. And there will be people who try to use your story for their own purposes, who want to turn your pain into their platform." Emma looked down at her phone one more time. 47.8 million views. Behind each number was a human being who'd chosen to care about a girl they'd never met, who'd felt angry on her behalf, who'd shared her story because they believed it mattered. But behind that number were also the people who hadn't watched, who'd scrolled past, who'd decided her pain wasn't worth 60 seconds of their time. The reality of viral fame was that for every person who cared deeply, there were dozens who simply moved on to the next video, the next story, the next moment of outrage or entertainment. "Mom," Emma said, reaching for her mother's hand, "do you remember what you told me when I was little and kids at school were mean to me?" Sandra smiled through her tears. "I told you that you had a voice, and that your voice mattered, and that someday you'd find the courage to use it." "Well," Emma said, holding up her phone where her own face stared back at her from the frozen video frame, "I think I found it. If this story reminds you of someone, maybe a child you know who's struggling, maybe the person you were at 16, maybe the adult you've become who still carries those old wounds, Emma's choice might seem impossible. How do you go back to the place where you were broken? How do you face the people who watched it happen? How do you transform your worst day into something that might help someone else survive theirs?" The answer, as Emma was about to discover, wasn't in the grand gestures or the viral moments. It was in the quiet decision to keep showing up, to keep speaking truth, to keep believing that one voice could matter even when that voice was shaking. Outside her hospital window, the sun was setting over Riverside, California, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Emma of hope. Tomorrow, she would go home. Next week, she would return to Jefferson High School. And someday soon, she would have to decide what to do with the power that had been thrust into her hands by the very people who'd tried to take her power away. But tonight, she was just a 16-year-old girl who'd survived something terrible and chosen to transform it into something necessary. Tonight, she was proof that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important messages. And sometimes, 47.8 million people are ready to listen. 3 weeks before the video that would destroy 4 lives and save countless others, Emma Carter made a decision that seemed insignificant at the time. She upgraded her smartwatch. It wasn't vanity or keeping up with trends. Emma's world didn't have room for such luxuries. It was practicality. Her mother worked double shifts at Riverside General, and the new watch had a medical alert feature that could detect falls and automatically call for help. For a single mother raising a daughter on a nurse's salary, $60 stretched over 3 months was an investment in peace of mind. Emma had no way of knowing that this small act of love and caution would become the weapon that brought down Jefferson High's untouchable royalty. The Tuesday that changed everything started like any other. Emma woke at 6:30 to a note from her mother. "Working late again tonight. Lasagna in fridge. Love you to the moon. Mom." The note was written on the back of a medical supply invoice, because even scrap paper was precious in the Carter household at Jefferson High. The social ecosystem was as rigid as any caste system. At the top sat Chad Morrison, whose father's donations to the football program and mother's position on the school board had created an untouchable shield around their golden boy. Madison Reynolds ruled the female hierarchy with the precision of a military strategist, her college-bound trajectory as flawless as her highlight routine. Tyler Brooks served as Chad's enforcer, his own academic failures masked by his athletic value to the team. And Ashley Park, the artistic talent whose creativity had twisted into cruelty, documented the group's reign with the eye of a court photographer. Emma existed in the invisible spaces between their world and the real world, walking hallways during class changes, eating lunch during their meetings, speaking only when spoken to by teachers. She'd perfected the art of occupying space without claiming it. But perfection, as Emma was about to learn, was a fragile thing. The cafeteria at Jefferson High was designed like a social map. Popular kids claimed the center tables with the best lighting and proximity to the food lines. Athletes dominated the East Wing, close to the gym entrance. Academic achievers clustered near the windows, their textbooks serving as both shields and signals, and along the west wall, in the space between the vending machines and the emergency exit, sat the invisible kids. Emma had claimed the corner table by the windows 3 years ago, not because she enjoyed the view of the parking lot, but because it offered the quickest escape route and the best angle to observe without being observed. She'd learned to read the room's emotional temperature, to sense when tension was building, to disappear into homework or headphones when trouble started brewing. On this particular Tuesday, the temperature was already running hot. Chad had received his rejection letter from USC that morning. Not a deferral, not a waitlist position, a flat rejection despite 4 years of dominating the football field and a father who'd contributed enough money to name a training facility. Madison was spiraling over news that her academic rival from Westview High had been accepted to Stanford early admission, threatening her own carefully planned trajectory. Tyler was nursing a hangover and a fresh warning from his probation officer about his attitude problem and Ashley was raw from a brutal critique in advanced art, where her teacher had called her work technically proficient but emotionally hollow. 4 different types of pain, 4 different reasons to lash out, and one quiet girl who'd made the mistake of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Emma entered the cafeteria at exactly 12:47 p.m. Her usual time calculated to avoid the lunch line rush and the prime social drama hour. She carried her lunch in a brown paper bag, not the trendy variety that suggested environmental consciousness, but the kind that came free with grocery store purchases, reused until it fell apart. She'd taken 3 steps toward her corner table when Madison's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Look what crawled out of the discount rack." Emma's feet stopped moving, but her heart started racing. In 3 years at Jefferson High, she'd learned that acknowledgement from Madison Reynolds was never positive attention. "I heard her mom works at the hospital," Ashley added, her voice carrying the particular brand of cruelty that came from intelligence turned mean. "Probably cleaning bedpans." "She's a nurse," Emma said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The cafeteria didn't go silent, that only happened in movies. But the conversations at nearby tables shifted, creating a pocket of attention around Emma and the 4 most powerful students in school. Everyone knew what was happening, and everyone knew their place in it. Chad Morrison stood up slowly, his 6'3" frame casting a shadow over Emma's 5'4" figure. 3 weeks of mounting pressure and frustration had been looking for a target, and Emma's quiet correction had provided one. "Did anyone ask you to speak?" Chad's voice carried the particular authority of someone who'd never been told no, never been denied anything, never been forced to consider that other people might matter as much as he did. Emma looked down at her lunch bag, calculating distances. 15 feet to her table, 20 feet to the exit, 30 feet to the guidance counselor's office. But she also knew that running would only delay the inevitable, and public humiliation would follow her whether she stayed or fled. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You're sorry." Tyler Brooks laughed, and the sound contained years of his own failures, his own rejections, his own awareness that his future was limited, and his present was slipping away. "You should be sorry. Sorry for thinking you belong here. Sorry for thinking anyone cares what you have to say." Emma's fingers found the side button on her smartwatch, the one that activated the emergency recording feature. She pressed it without thinking, a reflexive action born from her mother's medical training document, everything. Because memory fades, but evidence endures. "You know what your problem is?" Madison stepped closer, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the rage underneath. "You think you're better than us because you get good grades and keep your mouth shut. But we see you. We see you watching us, judging us, thinking you're so much better because your life is hard." "I don't think that," Emma said, and her voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Yes, you do." Ashley pulled out her phone, switching to video mode with the casual familiarity of her generation. "You sit over there in your little corner, acting all superior because you don't care about the things we care about. But you know what we don't care about you either." The first shove came from Tyler, hard enough to make Emma stumble but not fall. The lunch bag dropped from her hands, and her sandwich, carefully made from day-old bread and generic lunch meat, scattered across the cafeteria floor. "Oops," Chad said, his voice filled with mock concern. "Looks like someone's lunch got a little messy." "Better clean that up," Madison added. "Can't leave trash on the floor." "I'll get some napkins," Emma said, reaching toward the dispenser on the nearby table. "No!" Tyler's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "You made the mess. You clean it up the way messes get cleaned up." Emma looked around the cafeteria, seeking help from teachers, administrators, anyone with authority. But the lunch monitors were dealing with a food fight near the freshman tables, and the assistant principal was nowhere to be seen. The other students watched with the mixture of horror and fascination that comes from witnessing something terrible that isn't happening to you. "I don't understand," Emma said. "Eat it." Chad's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. "Eat your lunch off the floor, like the animal you are." "No." The word came out stronger than Emma intended, surprising everyone, including herself. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't just social drama anymore. This was a challenge to the established order. A crack in the foundation of power that had governed Jefferson High for years. Chad Morrison had been told no approximately 6 times in his entire life, and never by someone who mattered as little as Emma Carter. His hand found the back of Emma's head, fingers tangling in her hair. "I wasn't asking." What happened next lasted exactly 47 seconds and was recorded from 3 different angles. Emma's smartwatch, Ashley's phone, and a security camera that had been installed the previous semester following a vandalism incident. Chad forced Emma's head down toward the scattered food, his grip tightening when she tried to resist. Tyler pressed down on her shoulders, using his full weight to drive her toward the floor. Madison provided encouragement and direction like a film director orchestrating a scene, and Ashley narrated for her video, her voice clear and unmistakable. "This is what happens to freaks who think they're better than everyone else." Emma's knees hit the linoleum hard enough to tear her jeans. Her hands scraped against the floor as she tried to break her fall, and for 47 seconds, she experienced a kind of humiliation and powerlessness that would have broken most 16-year-old spirits completely. But Emma's smartwatch recorded everything. The angle was perfect, her wrist positioned to capture all 4 faces clearly. The audio crisp enough to distinguish individual voices. The assault unmistakable in its brutality and intent. When Emma finally managed to lift her head, her face streaked with tears and food debris, she looked directly into the camera and mouthed 2 words, "Help me." The video ended when a lunch monitor finally intervened, dispersing the crowd and sending Emma to the nurse's office with a hall pass and a warning not to cause more drama. Chad and his friends returned to their table as if nothing had happened, their social status intact, their power confirmed once again. Emma spent the rest of the day in a bathroom stall, cleaning food from her hair and blood from her scraped knees. She went home to an empty apartment, heated leftover lasagna in the microwave, and sat at her kitchen table staring at her smartwatch. 47 seconds that felt like 47 hours. For 2 days, the video sat on her device like a loaded weapon she was afraid to fire. She went through the motions of normal life, attending classes, completing assignments, eating lunch alone at her corner table while Chad and his friends laughed at their center table as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Wednesday night, Emma's mother came home from her shift to find her daughter sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, the smartwatch connected via USB cable. "What are you working on?" "Sweetheart." Emma looked up at her mother, this woman who'd raised her alone, who worked 16-hour shifts to keep them afloat, who'd taught her that dignity wasn't something other people could take away. and made the decision that would alter both their lives forever. I'm showing the world what really happens at Jefferson High. The TikTok account @QuietKidNoMore went live at 11:43 p.m. on Thursday night. The video was titled simply, "This is what bullying really looks like." During the first hour, brought 100 views, mostly from Emma's few followers and the random algorithm distribution that determined a video's initial reach. By morning, it had climbed to 50,000. By noon on Friday, it hit 500,000. But it was Friday evening when everything exploded. A popular anti-bullying activist with 3 million followers shared the video with the caption, "This is exactly why we need to do better." A celebrity whose daughter had recently survived a bullying incident retweeted it to her 15 million followers. Local news stations picked up the story for their weekend human interest segments. By Sunday morning, Emma's video had 25 million views. By Sunday night, it had 47 million. The comments section became a battlefield. Thousands of people shared their own stories of being bullied, their own experiences of watching it happen, their own regrets about not speaking up. But there were also comments defending Chad and Madison, questioning Emma's motives, suggesting she'd brought the attack on herself. The four bullies' lives began unraveling in real time. Chad Morrison's phone started ringing Saturday morning with calls from USC's athletic department. By Saturday afternoon, his scholarship offer had been officially withdrawn. His father's law firm released a statement distancing themselves from their son's actions. His mother stepped down from the school board to focus on family matters. Madison Reynolds watched her carefully constructed future collapse in a series of emails. Stanford University's admissions office was brief and devastating. In light of recent events that have come to our attention, we are withdrawing our offer of admission. Her parents' social media accounts went private. Her internship with the mayor's office was quietly terminated. Tyler Brooks was arrested Sunday morning at his family's home, charged with assault and battery. His prior juvenile record meant he was looking at real jail time, not just community service and counseling. His girlfriend broke up with him via text message while he sat in holding. Ashley Park's artistic talents, which had once seemed like her ticket to a prestigious art school, became her liability when the school's administration saw how she'd used creativity for cruelty. Her early admission was revoked. Her portfolio flagged by admissions officers at other institutions. Her reputation in the local art community destroyed overnight. But the consequences extended far beyond the four students. Principal Hayes found himself facing a federal investigation when it emerged that Emma's incident was part of a pattern of ignored bullying reports. Parents demanded his resignation. The school board called emergency meetings. Local news stations ran exposés on the school that failed to protect. The ripple effects spread through Jefferson High like cracks in a foundation. Teachers who'd looked the other way were questioned. Administrators who'd prioritized athletics over student safety were scrutinized. The entire culture of the school was forced into the light. And what people saw wasn't pretty. Emma, meanwhile, was learning what viral fame really meant. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests from local news, national talk shows, and documentary filmmakers. College recruiters reached out despite her junior status, impressed by her courage and her story. Anti-bullying organizations wanted her as a spokesperson. Publishers inquired about book deals. But fame came with a price. The family had to change their phone number 3 times. Emma's social media accounts were flooded with both support and harassment. Death threats arrived mixed in with letters of encouragement. Someone leaked their home address online, forcing them to stay with Sandra's sister for 2 weeks until the attention died down. "Do you regret it?" Sandra asked one evening as they sat in her sister's living room, watching Emma's story being discussed on the evening news. Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching a panel of experts debate whether her actions represented justice or revenge, whether viral shaming was an appropriate response to bullying, whether 16-year-olds should have the power to destroy each other's futures with a smartphone video. "I regret that it was necessary," Emma said finally. "I regret that 4 people felt like hurting me was acceptable. I regret that it took a viral video for anyone to care. But do I regret making sure the truth came out? No." 3 months later, Emma returned to Jefferson High School for her senior year. The building looked the same, but everything else had changed. Principal Hayes had been replaced by Dr. Martinez, a former social worker who had made student mental health her top priority. The counseling center had been expanded and renamed the Carter Wellness Hub, funded by donations from people who'd seen Emma's story and wanted to contribute to lasting change. Anti-bullying protocols were no longer suggestions but requirements, with real consequences for violations and protection for students who reported incidents. Chad Morrison was attending community college and working part-time at his uncle's auto shop. His football dreams replaced by a more modest goal of earning an associate's degree and rebuilding his reputation. Madison Reynolds was taking a gap year, doing community service and seeing a therapist while reapplying to colleges that might give her a second chance. Tyler Brooks was serving 6 months in juvenile detention, but he was also participating in anger management programs and victim impact seminars. Ashley Park was using her artistic talents for anti-bullying campaigns, creating posters and videos that promoted kindness instead of cruelty. None of them would ever be the same. But perhaps that was the point. Emma's senior year was different too. She was no longer invisible. Students knew her story. Teachers treated her with respect, and administrators listened when she spoke. She started a peer support group for students who'd experienced bullying. She testified before the state legislature about cyberbullying laws. She gave speeches at other schools about finding your voice and using it responsibly. But the most meaningful change was smaller and quieter. Other students had started recording incidents too, creating a culture where abuse couldn't hide in plain sight. The invisible kids felt a little less invisible. The quiet kids found their voices a little easier to use. On graduation day, Emma Carter walked across the stage as valedictorian, not because her grades were perfect, though they were, but because her classmates had elected her to speak for them. Her speech was short and simple. We are not powerless. We are not voiceless. We are not invisible. And when we refuse to accept injustice, when we document truth, when we support each other, we can change everything. One voice, one video, one moment of courage at a time. 47 million people had watched Emma's worst day, but millions more would hear about her best ones, the scholarships she earned, the students she helped, the policies she influenced, the lives she changed simply by refusing to stay silent. Sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom or through official channels. Sometimes it comes through the simple act of showing the world what really happened and trusting that people will choose to care. Emma Carter had learned that quiet didn't mean powerless, that invisible didn't mean insignificant, and that sometimes the smallest voice in the room could create the biggest change. And sometimes that was enough to transform not just one life, but an entire community's understanding of what it meant to treat each other with dignity. The girl who'd eaten lunch alone for 3 years was no longer alone. She'd found her voice, and in doing so, she'd helped countless others find theirs. That, perhaps, was the most viral message of all.